in your synagogues and pursue from town to town, so that upon you may come all the righteous blood shed on the earth, from the righteous blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I tell you, all this will come upon this generation. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills its prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you are not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
We have Stephanie and Peter coming up, and they're going to offer some reflections from St. Stephen, some of which they wrote themselves, and some were contributed by longtime members and families of the church.
Good morning. Good morning. Today we celebrate Founders Day at St. Stephen's. I have been attending this church since I was born and have many memories, some of which I will share. After I have finished, Peter will continue with more stories. First, some history. Our church was started in Westboro in 1872, with services held in different places until 1898, when a house and stable were purchased and the stable converted into a church. In 1906, St. Stephen's became a mission, led by a vicar and an executive committee. After World War II, a larger church was needed, and land was bought on John Street. An architect was hired whose philosophy was to create churches whose walls and roofs and spires express the aspirations of the people who congregate there. A major feature was our tall stained glass window. The first services were held here in 1957. In 1977, the diocese approved our application to become a parish with a rector and a vestry. From 1977 to 2025, there have been 6 rectors, including Mary. All have been important in the life of the church, and some will be mentioned in our stories today. My parents, Carmen and Valerie Borgia, moved to Westboro in 1973 and began attending St. Stephen's. They have fond memories with Father David Knight. One night, my parents hosted a dinner party. The Knights, who had all boys, and the Laffertys, another family with all sons, were there. My brothers and I were already asleep. But Father David asked if he could go up and peek on me, a baby girl. My mom said sure. My parents recalled that with permission, Father David picked me up and I snuggled into his arms, never waking up and putting a smile on his face that my mom will always remember. My parents have a lot of memories of being in the choir here. They recall the choir had some interesting parties. Christmas at Bob and Gail Park's house involving Bob's wonderful Manhattans, and cookouts at the LaCrosses. Over the course of the 15 years my parents sang in the choir, they feel fortunate to have had 3 incredible choir directors: Barbara Bruns, Joe Butler, and of course, Marla. For a few special occasions, my parents would do duets or trios, with my father playing violin or viola, my mother singing, and the organist at the time playing. My father recalls the wonderful aromas preparing for the annual church fair. The women would gather and begin baking apple pies a few days before. Marion Wilde would provide apples, having an orchard on her property. It was quite a production, involving people like Marion, Marguerite Newton, Jane Becker, Ruth Capon, and many more. He also remembers removing one step from around the altar. It used to be 2 levels high. My mother was church secretary at the time of Jack and Nancy's passing. She had worked with him for 7 years, and it was a very difficult time. My parents also have many memories around our church organ, running spaghetti suppers to raise funds for it, my father and Bill Harris building the organ pipes in the basement of the church, as well as laying out the parts in Fay Hall to build the towers above the organ, which he helped assemble to support the pipes. My earliest memory of St. Stephen's is sitting on the floor of my mom's office when she was secretary here, playing with Donnie and Marie paper dolls. I recall being in Peg Yankee's VBS class with my brothers. I remember my brother not wanting to go to Sunday school once and hiding by the copy machine in my mother's office, only to have his teacher, Bev Boyer, come by and use it. We did a nativity play in the sanctuary each year, and one year we used live sheep. We only did that once. I remember being in the junior choir with Marla. For some reason, singing about Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego with percussion instruments stays locked in my memories. I remember events like church fairs, cookouts at people's houses like the lacrosses, and sleepovers at Camp Soas with her daughters. I was a member of the youth group, going to Camp Bement and taking trips. I also worked in the nursery and taught Sunday school for many years, where I taught Gail Mackenzie's sons. We had a crew of us who did many of these things together: Beth Lacrosse, Michelle Soa, Julie Griffin, Jenna Mason, Kim Yankee, Laura McKay, and Dawn Philcox. I have a lot of memories of Father Jack Lawton. He would do youth sermons with a puppet. Jack and Nancy went on youth group trips and attended many events. We were a large and thriving church in the 80s. It felt like we all knew each other, and Jack knew everyone very well. I was scheduled as an acolyte at the 8 a.m. service the Sunday we all learned of Jack and Nancy's accident. The moment of that announcement is something I will never forget. But we were a family at St. Stephen's, and we still are. We have supported each other through difficult times and celebrated together at joyous ones. I can still recall the sermon our next rector, Father Dennis Jerry, gave on his first Sunday at St. Stephen's. He preached on Isaiah chapter 11, verse 1. A shoot shall come forth from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. And we did just that. St. Stephen's continued to thrive under Father Dennis. I can still see him happily bringing down the gospel for the reading, giving a little dance during one of his favorite hymns. I celebrated my wedding here. It was another joyous St. Stephen's family occasion. Barbara Bruns, the organist that was here when I was little, came back and coordinated the music. Bev Boyer acolyted, and June McGoldrick made sure everything ran smoothly. Bev Boyer also gave me some memories to share. Bev came to St. Stephen's in the 50s with her parents and brothers. That very first Sunday, she was pulled into the choir. Her first vestry position was as clerk, and she served for 7 years. The worst part was the vestry minutes were published in the Beacon newsletter each month. She got a call every month from Mary Emily Libby, Beacon editor, reminding her to drop off the notes in her mailbox. Bev recalls the church building was not finished as it is now. People did lots of fundraising, lots of suppers with no dishwasher. For example, Carmen, my dad, made spaghetti, and people washed dishes. Rooms were painted, and floors were installed. But it still continues. When asked, the people responded with funds and able hands. What you see today was done with God's guidance and parish members helping. We have been blessed over the years with people who have been generous with their time, talents, and treasures. On to Peter.
Thank you, Stephanie. I too would like to share some of the memories and anecdotes that I have from my family's almost 41 years of attending St. Stephen's. So here goes. When we first came in Advent 1984, we were made extremely welcome and immediately surrounded by a circle of friends and newfound family. I should say that at the time we had Julian, aged 2.5, and that Yvette was 8 months pregnant with Gemma, our daughter, and also one arm in a sling, having dislocated her elbow earlier that week. Father Jack Lawton was the rector, Jane Becker the deacon, and Father Bob Bain was non-stipendiary associate priest. Father Jack was very passionate about social justice and political issues. He and Nancy had marched to Selma with the civil rights protesters. He volunteered on the Dukakis gubernatorial campaign, and they were active in town affairs. He was also instrumental in establishing the Stephen Ministry Program, which enabled trained lay members to minister to fellow parishioners at times of pastoral or social need. Apart from all that, he was compassionate and a relaxed priest of what I would call low church style. Deacon Jane was a gifted and quiet presence who led the parish through its period of grieving following the Lawton's death. She was one of the first women to be ordained to the diaconate in the Diocese of Western Massachusetts. Her presence can still be found in the side chapel, which she renovated and moved from downstairs, and the deacon's bench in the narthex, which she donated in memory of her husband Brud, and which was handcrafted by their son. Father Bob's full-time job was as chief pathologist at Worcester Memorial, but he was also a priest and a serious student of the Bible. Sorry, I lost my place. If as a lay reader, like me, you pronounced or stumbled over a word or a name in the lectionary reading, he would take you to task and point you to the biblical pronunciation dictionary that's in the sanctuary. Very intimidating. St. Stephen's has always been a place where women have played a key role. At that time, there was a cohort of ladies, which I refer to as the Grand Dames of St. Stephen's. They numbered about 15 or more and were very active in the parish and community, running elite repeats, providing home-cooked meals for parishioners who were sick or recovering, creating and maintaining the altar linens and vestments, founding the Westboro Food Pantry, and created the beautiful needlepoint needlers that can now be seen in Fay Hall. One of those ladies was Marion Weil, who had died in 1980. She and her brother Palmer had been long-time members of the parish. She never married and had a career as an insurance underwriter. This well-travelled lady was before her time in advocating for women's rights and equality. She saw education as the key to this, and among several monetary gifts to us, she endowed an education fund to be used for the benefit of young women's further education. That fund still exists today in a modified form as the E. Marion Weil Fund. And if you're interested, Bob Dyshaw or I can regale you with the details for a very long time. We had a strong younger church with a youth group and a church school. The parish annual report of 1985 noted that there were 68 children enrolled in the school and with an average weekly attendance of 40 children. Father Jack loved the kids, and I remember at a family weekend at Camp Bement, when the adult and youth members broke into groups to study and discussion, Father Jack was to be found sprawled in the middle of the floor in St. Anne's, surrounded by and entertaining or being entertained by preschoolers and toddlers. What a picture. Music has always been an important and valued component of our worship at St. Stephen's. To this day, we have an outstanding senior choir to lead the hymns and service music, and it's under the direction of Marla. In the past, we also had a junior choir, and we even had a youth brass ensemble with Seth Dysher, Joshua Lawton, and Andrew Messiah. We were fortunate to have a contemporary music group who regularly led contemporary singing and worship services. They called themselves On Eagle's Wings, and their members included Cam Sower on flute, Fred Philcox and Mike Hubert on guitars, and Jennifer Marino as singer. Particularly memorable was their leading of the singing at the great vigil of Easter. We would celebrate the full liturgy of 9 readings, psalms and collects, and after many of the readings, they would lead an appropriate praise song. I cannot pass without mentioning the tragic car accident in July 1991 that took the lives of both Father Jack and Nancy and severely injured their son Joshua, resulting in his being in a body cast for weeks. They were returning from Camp Ament, and there was a violent rainstorm when the head-on crash occurred on Route 9 in Charlton. At the time, I was junior warden, but we were away on vacation in South Carolina, and we learned of the accident through a phone call from Father David Knight in Richmond, Virginia. He had been our priest before Jack, and I'd never met him. How was that possible is another story. After an extended and rather tumultuous interim period, in 1993, the parish called Father Dennis Jarry as rector. Father Dennis had been 25 years in ordained ministry in the Catholic Church. That is, until he fell in love with and wanted to marry Barbara. We had some interesting times teaching Father Dennis the Episcopal way. But it all turned out well in the end. As a sometime Catholic, Father Dennis was a wonderful liturgist, a gifted preacher, and a lover of parish parties and celebrations. The parish was traumatized by the events of 1991, and Father Dennis decided that a major renovation of the church building, financed by a capital campaign, would give the parish new strength and focus and provide a common goal. The renovation including reshingling of the main roof, painting the church exterior, renovating and finishing the basement, creating classrooms, library and meeting rooms, and adding a new addition to accommodate the parish offices. The budget for this was some $350,000. By Christmas 1997, despite the generosity of the parish, the campaign had stalled, with 30,000 still needed. On Christmas Eve, an anonymous check was found for $30,000 in the letterbox, and the parish celebrated extra well that year. God is good. In 1998, we celebrated our centenary with a series of events throughout the year. Among those I remember were a fancy dress party at which Father Dennis and Barbara came dressed as a gangster and his mom. However, Barbara was the gangster and Dennis was a very glamorous mom. We had a potluck supper with a guest who could recite the entire Gospel of St. Mark from memory. We enjoyed a Eucharist with the hymns and service music performed by Bono and the U2 rock band. Not in person, I would say. And the year culminated in a gala dinner dance at Indian Meadows. It was indeed a memorable year. Around that time, Gail Natio, a long-time parishioner, started an outreach ministry to the boys incarcerated at the Department of Youth Services Secure Treatment Facility located at Chauncey Lake on the site of the old state hospital. Although she herself would visit on more than regular basis, members of the parish would go to the facility 3 or 4 times a year to celebrate Christmas, Easter, July the 4th, and Thanksgiving with the boys. Typically, this would include a short worship service with guitars and singing, games, perhaps a presentation by the boys, food, gifts, exchange, and fellowship. The ministry continued well into the 2000s when the facility was moved out of Westborough. The boys had committed serious crimes, but they were still just teenagers. They responded well to our outreach. I still wonder if any of them managed to find a better way on the outside as a result of our ministry. By 1999, our parish had grown to over 150 families, and the vestry agreed to appoint an assistant priest to help Father Dennis with the needs of the growing parish. Father David Matson was called to take this role. With a mortgage and seed money from the Ruth Tyrrell legacy, the parish purchased a house on Robin Road, then helped prepare to house and welcome David, Deborah, and their daughter Rachel. Father David had grown up in Hopkinton, and his parents were long-time members of Good Shepherd Lutheran Church here in Westborough. So he was all well connected with the town and area. In addition to sharing priestly duties on Sundays, he took a particular interest in the youth of this church. He took the youth on trips and worked with them to collect rocks on their trails, which were then used to create the first St. Stephen's Labyrinth in the field that is now our paved parking lot. When in 2000 Father Dennis accepted a call to be rector of Christchurch Andover, Father David acted as our sole priest until an interim was appointed. Father Bill Martin was called to our next rector in 2002. He was a mature priest with a gentle and compassionate disposition. It is said that a parish should never choose a rector based on their spouse. Well, maybe Gail Martin, his wife, was the exception to that. She was a dynamic, charismatic, and energetic person who had raised 4 sons alone. She was a trained nurse and took a job in Worcester at the family medical clinic which served women in the margins of society. Together they formed a balanced team. They continued to challenge and lead St. Stephen's and to challenges and successes. I remember Gail purchased a set of children's handbells and taught the young children to ring their bells when a card showing their colour was held up. When later performed in the church for the congregation, it was amazing that from the cacophony of bells, a tune could be heard, and the joy and enthusiasm on the rings was amazing. During this time, the parish embarked on a number of ventures and missions. A couple that I recall were our participation in the Cathedral on the Common in Boston, which is a Sunday ministry to the unchurched. We were led by Tim and Liz Moss. Regardless of snow, rain, heat, on our appointed Sunday, we would leave after this church service and drive to Boston. Following a simple Eucharist on the Common, led by a member of the cathedral staff, and time of sharing, we would provide anyone who was there with a meal and fellowship before returning to Westbrook. In 2005, Ted Eddy, Beth Ireton, and Yvette Kite led a group of youth on a mission trip to Hayden, Kentucky. It was organised through the Appalachian Service Project and lasted a week, during which they fixed and restored homes that were in a desperate need of attention. Appalachia was a real eye-opener for all of the participants. In 2007, members of the parish organised a mission trip to the Rosebud Indian Reservation in South Dakota. In the early hours of an August Sunday morning, 11 members of the parish set off for Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where we started a 200-mile road trip halfway across the state to Rosebud. Once there, we repaired, painted, and improved the parish hall, which was next to the Episcopal Church of Jesus. The hall was used by the church and the wider Lakota community for event celebrations and funerals. I admit we did reward ourselves by taking a day off and visit the Black Hills, Mount Rushmore, the Crazy Horse statue, and the Badlands. Unforgettable sights and places. In 2010, Father Bill and Gail retired from St. Stephen's and moved back to their home in East Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania. I am now well out of time, so I will draw an end to the talk there. However, if anyone would like to learn more, all of the contributors will be in the coffee hour and will be delighted to continue to recall more of their memories. Thank you for listening to just a few of our stories. Several people have contributed, including Bob and Ann Deischer, Carmen and Valerie Borgia, Stephanie Borgia-Lumberg, and Bev Boyer. Since we don't have time to share all of the memories, now you will find copies of their contributions on the tables in the coffee hour. Thank you everyone who helped gather this information to save for the future. Thank you.